The thunderous echo of gunshots rang through the valley as Isabella Evans clutched her worn leather satchel, her knuckles white with fear. The year was 1876, and the Arizona Territory was as unforgiving as the men who pursued her through the rugged landscape. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she urged her exhausted horse forward, praying the approaching dust cloud on the horizon meant salvation rather than further peril. Nathaniel Montgomery wiped the sweat from his brow, squinting against the harsh sunlight that beat down on his weathered face. At 35, the lines around his eyes told stories of hardship and determination that had defined his life in the West. The cattle drive had been successful, and now he was heading back to his ranch outside Pendleton, Arizona Territory, where 6 young faces would be eagerly awaiting his return. "Pa's coming." 10-year-old James, the eldest of Nate's children, stood on the porch of their modest ranch house, pointing excitedly toward the trail. His siblings Sarah 8, Thomas 7, the twins Rebecca and Robert 5, and little Eliza 3 scrambled to join him, their faces lighting up at the sight of their father's familiar silhouette, Mrs. Winters, the elderly neighbor who had been looking after the children, stepped onto the porch behind them, wiping her hands on her apron. "Children, mind your manners now. Your father's been on the trail for 2 weeks." Nate smiled broadly as he approached, the weight of responsibility momentarily lifted by the joy of seeing his children. After losing his wife Margaret to fever 2 years prior, these 6 young souls were his entire world. He dismounted, kneeling down to gather the youngest ones in his arms. "Pa, did you bring us anything?" Sarah asked, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Maybe I did," Nate replied with a wink, reaching into his saddlebag. "But first, let me thank Mrs. Winters for looking after you all." The elderly woman waved dismissively. "It was no trouble, Mr. Montgomery, though I'm afraid this will be my last time. My daughter in Tucson is expecting, and I'll be leaving Pendleton next week." Nate's smile faltered slightly. Mrs. Winters had been a godsend since Margaret's passing, but he had known this day would come. "We'll miss you, but I understand. Family comes first. You should consider finding a proper mother for these children," she said quietly. "They need a woman's guidance, especially as they grow." Later that evening, after the children were tucked into bed, Nate sat alone on the porch, pondering Mrs. Winters' words. The ranch was prospering. He had good land, healthy cattle, and had even hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work. But he was stretched thin trying to be both father and mother to 6 children while running the ranch. The thought of remarrying had crossed his mind, but finding a woman willing to take on 6 children seemed almost impossible. Miles away, Isabella Evans continued her desperate flight. The men pursuing her henchmen of a corrupt businessman named Victor Holloway had been relentless in their chase. Isabella had worked as a schoolteacher in a small town in New Mexico Territory until she discovered Holloway's scheme to swindle several local families out of their land. When she'd threatened to expose him, he'd turned the tables, falsely accusing her of theft. With no family to stand by her and her reputation in tatters, she had fled. As darkness fell, Isabella spotted a small abandoned cabin. Exhausted and desperate for shelter, she guided her horse toward it, praying for just a few hours of rest before continuing her journey west. Her plan was to reach California, where perhaps she could start fresh, though the prospect of beginning anew with no connections and few resources filled her with dread. The following morning in Pendleton, Nate loaded his children into the wagon for their monthly trip to town. James sat proudly beside his father while the other children settled in the back, excited for the rare treat of visiting the bustling settlement. "Remember, stay together," Nate instructed as they arrived in Pendleton. "James, watch your siblings while I speak with Mr. Donnelly at the bank." "Yes, Pa," James replied, taking his responsibility seriously. The town of Pendleton had grown significantly over the past few years. What had once been little more than a trading post was now a proper settlement with a main street boasting a general store, a bank, a small hotel, and even a schoolhouse that had been built the previous year. As the children waited outside the bank, they watched the diverse array of people going about their business: cowboys, miners, merchants, and the occasional well-dressed traveler passing through. Inside the bank, Nate discussed the possibility of expanding his ranch with Mr. Donnelly, the bank manager. "You've built something impressive, Montgomery," Donnelly said, reviewing Nate's finances. "But taking on more land means more hands to work it, and that means more expense." "I've thought about that," Nate replied. "The Wilkins property adjoining mine is perfect for what I need, and with the right management I could increase my herd significantly." "And what about those 6 youngsters of yours? How are you managing?" Nate sighed. "One day at a time, Mrs. Winters has been helping, but she's leaving. I'll figure something out. My wife mentioned the town council is looking for a new schoolteacher. The last one left to get married last month. Perhaps whoever they hire might be willing to help with your children after school hours." Nate nodded thoughtfully. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it might help in the short term. Later that afternoon, as the Montgomerys prepared to leave town, a commotion erupted near the sheriff's office. Sheriff Parker was confronting a dusty, exhausted-looking woman whose clothes marked her as someone who had been on the road for some time. "I'm telling you, Sheriff, these accusations are false," the woman insisted, her voice strained but dignified. "Victor Holloway is corrupt and dangerous. He's after me because I discovered his land swindle." "Miss, I've got a telegram from the sheriff in Silver Creek saying you're wanted for theft," Sheriff Parker replied skeptically. "I have to hold you until we sort this out." The woman, Isabella Evans, looked around desperately, her eyes briefly meeting Nate's across the street. There was something in that look, determination mixed with fear, that struck him. "What's happening, Pa?" James asked, noticing his father's attention diverted. "Trouble, it seems," Nate replied, instinctively moving his children behind him as he watched the scene unfold. Isabella continued her protest. "Sheriff, please. Holloway has influence with officials in Silver Creek. If you lock me up, his men will come for me and I won't live to see a fair trial." Sheriff Parker seemed unmoved. "Miss Evans, I have a duty, I can vouch for her," came a voice from the crowd. Nate turned to see Doc Wilson, the town physician who had been passing by, step forward. "You know this woman, Doc?" the sheriff asked, surprised. "I know of her. Isabella Evans is a respected schoolteacher. My cousin in Silver Creek mentioned her standing up to some powerful interests there, said she was as honest as they come." Isabella looked at the doctor with stunned gratitude. "Thank you, sir, though I don't believe we've met." "Walter Wilson," the doctor replied with a nod. "And sometimes news travels faster than telegrams, especially when it comes to injustice." The sheriff hesitated, looking between Isabella and the doctor. "I still need to hold her until I get clarification." "I'll take responsibility for her," Doc Wilson offered. "The town needs a schoolteacher anyway. Miss Evans can stay with my sister until this matter is resolved." Nate found himself stepping forward before he fully realized what he was doing. "I could use some help with my children. If Miss Evans is qualified to teach, perhaps she could stay at my ranch. There's the old foreman's cabin, it's small but private." All eyes turned to Nate, including Isabella's startled gaze. "Mr. Montgomery has 6 children and runs a ranch outside of town," Doc Wilson explained to Isabella. "He's well respected here." Sheriff Parker scratched his chin thoughtfully. "I suppose if both Doc Wilson and Montgomery are willing to vouch for her, but she can't leave the area until I get this sorted out." Isabella looked between the two men, uncertainty clear on her face. She had been running for days, trusting no one, and now strangers were offering help. But the alternative was a jail cell and the likelihood that Holloway's men would find her. "I'm a good teacher," she said finally, addressing Nate directly, "and I'm innocent of these charges." "I would be grateful for the opportunity to prove both." Nate nodded. "My children have been without proper schooling since their mother passed. The arrangement could benefit us both." And so it was decided. Isabella would stay at the Montgomery ranch, helping with the children and providing them with education, while the sheriff investigated the charges against her. As they left town in Nate's wagon, the children eyed their new companion with curious stares. "Are you really going to be our teacher?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. Isabella managed a smile despite her exhaustion and uncertainty. "Yes, if that's all right with you. I've taught children of all ages." "Can you read stories?" Thomas asked eagerly. "I love stories," Isabella replied, her smile warming. "Do you have favorites?" As the children began chattering about their preferred tales, Nate watched Isabella from the corner of his eye. There was strength in her posture, despite her obvious fatigue, and intelligence in her quick responses to the children's questions. Whatever trouble she was in, his instinct told him she was indeed innocent. The Montgomery ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a well-maintained main house with a large barn, corrals, and several smaller outbuildings spread across the property. Cattle grazed in the distance, and the setting sun cast the whole scene in a golden glow. "It's beautiful," Isabella said softly. "It's home," Nate replied simply. "The foreman's cabin is just behind the main house. It's been empty since I took over managing the ranch myself, but it's clean and sound." As the wagon pulled up to the main house, two men emerged from the barn. Nate's ranch hands, Diego Alvarez and Frank Turner. "Got company, boss?" Frank asked, eyeing Isabella with curiosity. "Miss Evans will be staying with us for a while, teaching the children," Nate explained, helping Isabella down from the wagon. "She'll be in the foreman's cabin." That evening, after settling Isabella into the small but comfortable cabin and having a simple dinner together, Nate sat on his porch watching the stars emerge. The children were asleep, and for the first time in months, he felt a strange sense of hope. Perhaps having Miss Evans here would provide the stability his children needed, at least temporarily. Inside the foreman's cabin, Isabella sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to truly rest. She had no illusions about her situation. She was still in danger, still falsely accused, but for the moment, she was safe. The Montgomery children had been welcoming, especially little Eliza, who had immediately taken her hand as they entered the house. And Nathaniel Montgomery himself seemed honorable, if somewhat reserved. Tomorrow she would begin teaching the children, creating some semblance of normalcy in their lives and hers. For now, that would have to be enough. The next morning, Isabella woke early, startled at first by the unfamiliar surroundings before remembering the events of the previous day. She dressed quickly in one of her two remaining dresses, grateful that she had managed to pack a small bag before fleeing Silver Creek. Looking in the small mirror above the wash basin, she attempted to make herself presentable, smoothing her dark hair into a neat bun. A knock at the door announced Nate's presence. "Miss Evans, breakfast will be ready soon if you'd care to join us." Isabella opened the door, finding Nate already dressed for ranch work, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery, I'll be right there." As they walked toward the main house, Nate explained the day's routine. "I typically start work at sunrise. The children usually help with morning chores, collecting eggs, feeding the smaller animals. I thought you might want to begin lessons after breakfast. There's a small room off the kitchen we've been using for their studies, though it's not much." "That sounds perfect," Isabella replied. "I don't require much to teach, just willing students." Breakfast was a lively affair, with the children full of questions for their new teacher. Isabella answered patiently, already beginning to distinguish each child's personality. James was serious and responsible, clearly aware of his role as the eldest. Sarah was thoughtful and observant, while Thomas was bursting with energy and curiosity. The twins, Rebecca and Robert, were inseparable but distinct, Rebecca being the more talkative, Robert more contemplative. And little Eliza was sweet-natured and eager to please. After breakfast, Nate headed out to work with his ranch hands while Isabella gathered the children in the small study room. She quickly assessed their education levels, finding that while James and Sarah had solid foundations in reading and arithmetic, the younger children needed more structured learning. "We'll create a schedule," she explained, writing on a small slate. "Each of you will have lessons appropriate for your age, and we'll also have subjects we learn together." The morning passed quickly as Isabella established routines and expectations. By lunchtime, she had gained the children's trust and interest, particularly when she promised to read to them from a book of Western tales she had brought in her satchel. Throughout the day, Nate occasionally glanced toward the house, watching through windows as Isabella worked with his children. There was something both familiar and novel about having a woman's presence in their home again. It stirred memories of Margaret, yet Isabella's approach was entirely her own, gentle but firm, engaging the children's minds with questions rather than simply providing answers. That evening, as Nate returned from checking the western pasture, he found Isabella sitting on the porch with the children gathered around her, listening intently as she read aloud. The scene was so domestic, so peaceful that he paused before approaching, not wanting to disrupt the moment. "Pause back," Thomas spotted him first, jumping up to run toward his father. Isabella closed the book, smiling as the other children followed Thomas's lead. "They've been waiting for you. They wanted to show you what they learned today." Over dinner, each child proudly demonstrated new knowledge. James solved a complex arithmetic problem. Sarah recited a poem she had memorized, and even the younger ones showed progress with letters and numbers. "You've accomplished a great deal in one day," Nate remarked to Isabella after the children were sent to prepare for bed. "They're bright children, eager to learn," she replied. "You've done well with them, Mr. Montgomery. They're kind and respectful despite their loss." Nate's expression softened slightly. "Margaret, my wife, believed in education. She taught them until she fell ill. I've tried to continue her lessons, but running the ranch takes most of my time." "I understand," Isabella said quietly, "and I'm grateful for the opportunity to help while I'm here." She hesitated before adding, "Though I hope Sheriff Parker resolves this misunderstanding soon." "What exactly happened in Silver Creek, if you don't mind my asking?" Isabella sighed, deciding that honesty was best. "I was the schoolteacher there for 2 years. Victor Holloway is a businessman who's been buying up land around Silver Creek, sometimes through questionable means. I discovered he was forging documents to claim property from families who couldn't read well enough to understand what they were signing. When I started helping those families review contracts, Holloway retaliated by accusing me of stealing from the school fund. With his influence, my word meant little against his." Nate studied her face, looking for any sign of deception but finding none. "Those are serious accusations on both sides." "I know how it sounds," Isabella admitted. "A woman alone, running from the law, telling tales of corruption. But I swear to you, Mr. Montgomery, I'm not a thief." After a moment, Nate nodded. "I believe you, Miss Evans, and until this matter is resolved, you have a place here." The days began to fall into a rhythm at the Montgomery ranch. Each morning, Isabella would join the family for breakfast before teaching the children for several hours. In the afternoons, while the younger children napped, she would give James and Sarah more advanced lessons or help around the house mending clothes, baking bread, or preparing dinner. Nate observed these changes with mixed emotions. Having Isabella there made life easier in many ways. The children were learning. The house was more orderly, and meals were more varied and plentiful. But her presence also reminded him of what his family had been missing since Margaret's death, and what they would miss again when Isabella inevitably left. A week after her arrival, Sheriff Parker rode out to the ranch with news. "Telegram from Silver Creek," he announced, handing a paper to Isabella. "The charges haven't been dropped, but there's doubt being cast on Holloway's story. Seems some folks are speaking up in your defense, Miss Evans." Isabella read the telegram with relief. "Thank you, Sheriff. This is encouraging." "You're still restricted to Pendleton and surroundings," the sheriff reminded her, "but this buys us some time to get to the truth." After he left, Isabella found Nate repairing a fence near the barn. "The sheriff brought news," she explained. "It seems some people in Silver Creek are questioning Mr. Holloway's accusations." "That's good news," Nate replied, hammering a nail into place, "though I suspect Holloway isn't a man who gives up easily." "No, he isn't," Isabella agreed, her expression darkening. "Which is why I need to be prepared for whatever comes next." She hesitated before continuing. "Mr. Montgomery, I want to thank you for taking me in, especially given the circumstances. Your trust means more than I can express." Nate set down his hammer, turning to face her fully. "My father taught me to judge people by their actions, not by what others say about them. You've been nothing but good to my children, and that carries weight with me." Their eyes met briefly before Isabella looked away, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Still, I don't want to bring trouble to your door. If there's any sign of Holloway's men in the area, I'll leave immediately." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," Nate replied, surprised by how strongly he meant it. As the days passed, Isabella became more integrated into the fabric of ranch life. She started a small garden beside her cabin, with the children eagerly helping to plant vegetables and flowers. She organized the family's mealtimes and created educational games that the children could play outdoors, combining learning with physical activity. Nate found himself looking forward to evenings when they would all gather in the main house. Sometimes Isabella would read aloud, other times they would sing songs or simply talk about the day's events. It reminded him of the early years of his marriage when Margaret was alive and the older children were small. One evening, after the children were asleep, Nate and Isabella sat on the porch, watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "May I ask about your wife?" Isabella ventured carefully. "The children mention her sometimes, but I don't want to say the wrong thing." Nate was quiet for so long that Isabella thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Margaret and I came west together after we married in St. Louis in '59. I was 23, she was 20. We built this place from nothing, just a small cabin at first, with big dreams. The children came along one by one, and each time Margaret would say they were pieces of our dream taking human form." He paused, a sad smile crossing his face. "She took sick after Eliza was born. Fever that wouldn't break. Doc Wilson did everything he could, but she was gone within a week." "I'm so sorry," Isabella said softly. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was, Nate agreed. Strong, kind, patient, the children are like her in different ways. James has her determination. Sarah has her gentleness, the others. They were too young to remember her clearly, especially Eliza. "But they have you," Isabella pointed out, "and you've kept her memory alive for them." Nate looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. "What about you, Miss Evans? You mentioned having no family." Isabella's gaze returned to the sunset. "My father was a professor at a small college in Pennsylvania. My mother taught piano. They believed strongly in education, especially for girls, which wasn't common. They died within months of each other. When I was 19, my father of a heart ailment, my mother of what I think was simply a broken heart. With no siblings and few distant relatives, I decided to use my education to make my own way. Teaching seemed the natural choice. It can't have been easy traveling west alone." "It wasn't," she admitted, "but I've never regretted it. There's something about the West, the openness, the possibility. Despite the hardships, people here are building something new." As darkness fell, they lapsed into comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. For Nate, Isabella's presence had awakened feelings he had believed dormant since Margaret's death. For Isabella, the Montgomery ranch was beginning to feel like something she had never truly had a home. The following Sunday, the family attended church in Pendleton. It was Isabella's first time venturing into town since her arrival, and she was nervous about the reception she might receive. To her relief, Doc Wilson's endorsement seemed to have softened most people's suspicions, and she was welcomed warmly, particularly by families with school-aged children eager for a teacher. The town council would like to speak with you about formally taking on the schoolteacher position, Doc Wilson informed her after the service. Once your situation is resolved, of course. That's very kind, Isabella replied, glancing at Nate, who stood nearby, deep in conversation with another rancher. I'd be honored to be considered. As they prepared to return to the ranch, Sheriff Parker approached with a concerned expression. Miss Evans, Mr. Montgomery, I should warn you. Had a stranger asking questions about you, Miss Evans. Described himself as a businessman from New Mexico, but something didn't sit right. Isabella's face paled. Did he give a name? Called himself Smith, but he had a fancy watch chain with the initials VH. I didn't let on that you were here, but he's staying at the hotel and folks talk. Nate's jaw tightened. Victor Holloway, likely, the sheriff nodded. I'd advise caution, he had 2 rough-looking men with him. On the ride back to the ranch, Isabella was silent, her mind racing with worry. Once the children were occupied with Sunday activities, she sought out Nate in the barn. I should leave, she announced without preamble. If Holloway is in Pendleton, he won't stop until he finds me. I won't put your family at risk. Nate continued brushing down his horse, his movements deliberate. And where would you go, Miss Evans? California was your destination, wasn't it? That's still several hundred miles of dangerous territory. I'll manage, she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. Setting down the brush, Nate turned to her. Isabella. It was the first time he had used her given name, and it stopped her protest. Running won't solve this. If Holloway is the man you describe, he'll simply follow, and you'll be alone and vulnerable on the trail. But your children are safer with you here than with you fleeing across the territory, Nate interrupted. Diego and Frank are good men, and they're both handy with firearms. Sheriff Parker knows the situation. We'll be vigilant, but we'll face this together. Isabella's eyes filled with unexpected tears at his words. Why would you take this risk for me? You barely know me. Nate stepped closer, his expression softening. I know enough. I know you're kind to my children. I know you're honest and principled. And I know that in the short time you've been here, you've brought light back into this house in a way I didn't think possible. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of growing feelings that neither was quite ready to name. The moment was broken by James calling from outside the barn, announcing that Sarah and Thomas were arguing over a game. Nate stepped back, clearing his throat. We'll increase our watchfulness. Diego will take night shifts patrolling the property, but you stay, Miss Evans, please. Isabella nodded slowly. All right. But at the first sign of danger to the children, I'm leaving. That's non-negotiable. Agreed, Nate replied, though silently he had already decided he would not let her face Holloway alone, regardless of what might come. The next several days passed in heightened alertness. Nate instructed the children to stay close to the house, and Isabella conducted lessons indoors rather than in the garden, as had become their habit on pleasant days. Diego and Frank took turns riding the property boundaries, watching for strangers, while Nate kept his rifle closer than usual. Despite the tension, life at the ranch continued. Isabella found herself growing more attached to the children with each passing day. Even James, who had been the most reserved, had begun to seek her out for help with advanced mathematics and discussions about books he was reading. One evening, as Isabella was helping Sarah practice braiding Eliza's hair, the little girl looked up at her with serious eyes. Miss Evans, are you going to be our new mama? The innocent question caught Isabella off guard. She glanced up to find Nate standing in the doorway, having overheard. Their eyes met briefly before he turned and walked away, leaving Isabella to carefully answer. I'm your teacher, Eliza, she said gently, and I care about all of you very much. But you could be our mama too, Sarah suggested, her fingers working through her sister's golden curls. Pa smiles more since you came, and you make the best apple pie just like Mama used to. Isabella's heart constricted at the hope in the girls' faces. It's not that simple, sweetheart. Your father would have to, she stopped, realizing the conversation had ventured into territory she wasn't prepared to navigate. Let's finish this braid, shall we? It's nearly bedtime. Later that night, unable to sleep, Isabella stepped outside her cabin, gazing up at the star-filled sky. The ranch was peaceful, with only the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the cool night air. Couldn't sleep either. Nate's voice came from the shadows near the main house. Too much on my mind, she admitted as he approached. The children, Holloway, the future. Nate nodded, coming to stand beside her. I overheard what Eliza asked you. I apologize if it made you uncomfortable. There's no need to apologize, Isabella replied softly. Children speak what's in their hearts. It's one of the things I love about teaching them. Still, I don't want you to feel pressured by their expectations. Isabella turned to face him, gathering her courage. And what about your expectations, Mr. Montgomery? What do you want? In the moonlight, Nate's expression was unguarded for perhaps the first time since she'd met him. I want my children to be happy and safe. I want this ranch to prosper. He paused, his voice dropping lower. And increasingly, I find myself wanting you to stay, not just as their teacher but as. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Isabella felt her heart race as he took a step closer, his hand hesitantly rising to touch her cheek. Isabella, I know it hasn't been long and your situation is complicated, but there's something growing between us, isn't there? Or am I imagining it? You're not imagining it, she whispered, her own hand coming up to cover his. But there's so much uncertainty. Holloway, the charges against me, my place here. Nate's other hand found her waist, drawing her gently closer. Some things are worth the risk. Their first kiss was tentative, a question being asked and answered. When they pulled apart, Isabella's eyes were shining with unshed tears. I never expected to find this here, she admitted. A family, a home, neither did I, Nate replied honestly. After Margaret died, I thought that part of my life was over, but then you arrived and everything changed. They might have stayed longer, talking and exploring these newfound feelings, had they not been interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Nate immediately tensed, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. Get inside your cabin and lock the door, he instructed quickly. I'll see who it is. Isabella hurried to obey, her heart now racing for a different reason. Through the window of her cabin, she watched as Nate strode toward the approaching rider, his posture alert and wary. To her relief, it was only Frank returning from town with supplies. But the ranch hand's expression was grim as he dismounted and spoke urgently to Nate. After a brief conversation, Nate hurried to Isabella's cabin, knocking firmly. It's Holloway, he explained when she opened the door. Frank overheard him at the saloon, boasting that he knows where you are and plans to collect you tomorrow. He has 3 men with him. Isabella's face drained of color. The children will be fine, Nate assured her, though his own face was taut with concern. I've already sent word to Sheriff Parker, but he's out tracking cattle rustlers and might not return in time. Diego and Frank are preparing. We'll defend the ranch if necessary. This is exactly what I feared, Isabella said, her voice trembling slightly. Your family being put in danger because of me. Nate took her hands in his. Listen to me. You are part of this family now, whether you've realized it or not. The children adore you. He paused, then continued with determination. I care for you deeply, Isabella. We face this together. Isabella looked up at him, fear warring with something else in her eyes. I care for you too, Nathaniel. More than I should after such a short time. But if anything happened to you or the children because of me, I couldn't bear it. Nothing will happen, he promised, pulling her into a protective embrace. But I need you to promise me something. If things go badly tomorrow, take the children and ride for Doc Wilson's place in town. He'll keep you all safe until I can come for you. Isabella nodded against his chest, praying it wouldn't come to that. Dawn broke clear and cool over the Montgomery ranch. The children had been told only that they were to remain indoors for the day, with James given the responsibility of keeping his siblings occupied and away from windows. Diego positioned himself near the barn with a clear view of the approach road while Frank watched the western ridge. Nate stood on the porch of the main house, rifle in hand, Isabella beside him. "They're coming," Diego called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "4 riders approaching from the east," Nate turned to Isabella. "Stay inside with the children. No matter what you hear, don't come out unless I call for you." She nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Be careful, Nathaniel." As she disappeared into the house, Nate took up position at the corner of the porch, watching as the 4 men approached at a leisurely pace, as if they had nothing to fear. In the lead was a well-dressed man with a meticulously groomed beard. Victor Holloway, Nate presumed. Behind him rode 3 rough-looking men, each openly armed. "Mr. Montgomery," Holloway called out as they drew near, tipping his hat with exaggerated politeness. "I believe you're harboring someone who belongs to me." "No one here belongs to you, Holloway," Nate replied coldly. "State your business and then leave my property." Holloway's smile didn't reach his eyes. "My business is Miss Isabella Evans, a thief and a liar who stole from me and then fled justice. I have the legal right to return her to Silver Creek to face charges." "You have no rights here," Nate countered, his rifle still aimed casually but meaningfully in Holloway's direction. "Sheriff Parker is handling the matter officially. If you have legitimate claims, take them to him." One of Holloway's men spat on the ground. "We ain't got time for this, boss. Let's just take the woman and go." "Patience, Reed," Holloway admonished before turning back to Nate. "Mr. Montgomery, I understand you have children. I would hate for them to witness any unpleasantness. Hand over Miss Evans and we'll be on our way." At the veiled threat to his children, something dangerous flashed in Nate's eyes. "You've made a serious mistake coming here, Holloway. This is my home and everyone in it is under my protection. I'll say it once more, leave." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Holloway shrugged as if the matter was of little consequence. "Have it your way. Reed, Jenkins, Williams, get the woman." As the 3 men moved to dismount, Diego emerged from his position, rifle raised, followed by Frank from the other direction. The odds were now even, and Holloway's men hesitated. 3 against 3, Nate observed calmly. "And we're defending our home. Think carefully about your next move, gentlemen." Holloway's confident expression faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "This isn't over, Montgomery. The law is on my side." "Is it?" came a new voice as Sheriff Parker rode into the yard, accompanied by 2 deputies. "Because I've received some interesting telegrams from Silver Creek this past week, Holloway. Seems the bank manager there has some questions about forged documents. And the school board is wondering where their missing funds really went." Holloway's face drained of color. "That's preposterous. I'm a respected businessman who's facing serious charges back in New Mexico territory," the sheriff interrupted, dismounting. "Your men can go, but you're coming with me, Holloway. We have some matters to discuss while we wait for the U.S. Marshal to arrive from Tucson." As the sheriff and his deputies took Holloway into custody, the businessman's hired men quickly departed, wanting no part of their employer's legal troubles. Nate watched until they were well away from the ranch before lowering his rifle and calling toward the house. "Isabella, it's over. You can come out." The door opened, and Isabella emerged cautiously, the children clustered behind her. Seeing the sheriff with a handcuffed Holloway, she let out a shaky breath of relief. "Miss Evans," Sheriff Parker acknowledged with a nod. "Seems you were telling the truth all along. We received confirmation from Silver Creek yesterday. The charges against you have been dropped, and there's talk of bringing charges against Mr. Holloway here instead." "Thank you, Sheriff," Isabella replied, her voice steady despite her obvious emotion. "I'm grateful for your fairness in this matter." As the sheriff prepared to leave with his prisoner, he tipped his hat to Nate. "Town council's still looking for that schoolteacher, Montgomery. Might want to mention that to Miss Evans, now that she's free to consider the position." After they had gone, Isabella found herself surrounded by the Montgomery children, all talking at once, relieved that the tension of the morning was over. Nate stood back, watching the scene with a smile that reached his eyes for the first time in days. That evening, after the excitement had died down and the children were asleep, Nate and Isabella sat together on the porch swing, her head resting against his shoulder. "What will you do now?" he asked quietly, his arm around her waist. "The school position is yours if you want it." Isabella was silent for a moment, considering. "A week ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. It's a good opportunity, a chance to build a life here in Pendleton. And now," she lifted her head to look at him directly, "now I find myself wanting something more. These past weeks with you and the children, it's shown me what a family can be, what our family could be if you wanted that too." Nate's hand came up to cup her cheek. "Isabella Evans, from the moment you arrived here, something changed. The house felt like a home again. The children were happier. I found myself looking forward to each day in a way I hadn't since Margaret died." He took a deep breath. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've fallen in love with you, and if you'll have me, I'd be honored to call you my wife." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes. "Are you certain?" 6 children is a significant responsibility to ask anyone to take on. "I'm not asking just anyone," Nate replied softly. "I'm asking you, the woman who taught James advanced mathematics and braided Eliza's hair, who reads stories with different voices for each character and makes Thomas laugh until he hiccups. The woman my children already love, almost as much as I do." Isabella's smile was radiant through her tears. "Then yes, Nathaniel Montgomery, I will marry you and be a mother to your children and build a life with you here." Their second kiss was deeper than the first, a promise of the future they would share. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the Pendleton church, with the entire town in attendance. Isabella wore a simple white dress that Sarah and Rebecca had helped her decorate with tiny wildflowers gathered from the ranch. Nate stood tall and proud in his best suit, his 6 children arranged beside him as witnesses to the union. Doc Wilson gave the bride away, and Sheriff Parker served as best man. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, little Eliza clapped her hands in delight, causing laughter to ripple through the congregation. "I told you she would be our mama," she whispered loudly to Sarah, who smiled and nodded in agreement. The celebration afterward was held at the Montgomery Ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from tree branches. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades reminiscent of that evening when Nate and Isabella had first acknowledged their feelings for each other, the new family stood together for a photograph. Nate with his arm around his wife. The children gathered around them. "I never imagined this," Isabella said later as they danced slowly under the stars, the children playing nearby under the watchful eyes of Diego and Frank. "When I fled Silver Creek, I thought I had lost everything: my reputation, my career, my future. Instead, I found everything I never knew I wanted." Nate pulled her closer, his voice low and tender. "And I thought I could never love again after losing Margaret. Then you arrived, needing sanctuary, and instead gave us the greatest gift: a mother for my children and a partner for me." As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, the Montgomery Ranch flourished under the care of its expanded family. Isabella took on the role of teacher not only for the Montgomery children, but for several neighboring families' children as well, converting one of the outbuildings into a small schoolhouse. Nate, with Isabella's support and assistance with the bookkeeping, successfully acquired the adjoining Wilkins property, expanding the ranch's operations. The following spring brought another blessing. Isabella discovered she was expecting a child of her own. When their son, William, was born in late autumn of 1877, he was welcomed by 6 adoring siblings who took turns holding him and promising to teach him everything they knew. "He has your eyes," Nate observed as they sat together before the fireplace, Isabella cradling their newborn while the other children played a quiet game nearby. "And your stubborn chin," she replied with a smile, tracing the baby's tiny features with her finger. "He'll be strong like his father." Nate's arm tightened around her shoulders, "and wise like his mother." As the years passed, the Montgomery family continued to grow. A daughter, Grace, joined them 2 years after William, completing their family of 10. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. James eventually took over much of the ranch management, allowing Nate to focus on expanding their cattle trading business across the Southwest. Isabella's small schoolhouse grew into Pendleton's official school, where she taught until well into her 60s, shaping the minds of several generations of the town's children. But no matter how busy life became, they never forgot how their family had been formed: a desperate schoolteacher fleeing false accusations, and a lonely rancher with 6 children in need of a mother's love. What had begun as a temporary arrangement born of necessity had blossomed into a love that would sustain them through all the joys and challenges that life in the West could bring. And on warm summer evenings, long after the children had grown and started families of their own, Nate and Isabella could still be found sitting together on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together and the courage they had found to build a life neither had dared to imagine.